Welcome to tonight's lecture. Sorry David couldn't make it here today, but it's good because I want this job more. It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker today. He got a degree in applied math at Harvard University. In the time of 1990 to 1994, he was the editor of the Journal of Irreproducible Results. In 1991, when I was 4, he founded this Ig Nobel Prize. He's a great writer. He's the author of 6 books, and he's a great speaker. His TED Talk online has been watched over 1 million times. So without further ado, let's welcome Mark Abraham.
Thank you, Patricia. Can everyone hear me okay? I know it's a foolish question because if you can't hear me, you can't hear the question. But, and I wonder if we could turn the lights down a little bit. I'm going to be showing you a lot of pictures. The reason I'm going to show you a lot of pictures is way back when I first became a magazine editor and started talking about the things that we were writing about, I discovered that if I just talk about them, people were highly amused, and they would come up afterwards and compliment me on making up such wonderful jokes. And I would have to explain to them that I don't tell jokes. I was just telling you facts. And by experiment, I discovered that if I show pictures of these things, it makes it easier for people to at least try to believe that I'm just telling you facts. Okay? So that's our logo. It either explains itself or it doesn't. I will explain things as we go along, and we'll take questions afterwards if you have some. Is this a tradition of how you turn the lights down? Maybe we could turn the lights down. Hey, okay, thank you. Okay. The first thing I'm going to show you, I will tell you about the Ig Nobel Prizes, and I'm going to show you a little piece of video from about 1 year ago. If you were living in the Canadian city of Winnipeg and you watched the evening news 1 year ago, you would have seen this.
A British man who took on a goat's eye view of the world has been rewarded for his efforts.
Because we're all completely trapped inside our own brain, our own perception of the world.
I can't make this stuff up. Thomas Thwaites had a set of prosthetic legs built and spent 3 days living among goats in the Alps. He did it because he wanted a simpler life. And he says it was fascinating. A little bizarre, though. Thwaites co-won an Ig Nobel Prize for biology with another man who tried living as several different animals. The Ig Nobel Awards. The Ig Nobel Awards honor research that may seem bizarre, but actually provokes thought. Don't watch the video. It's really I need to clean it.
Well, we're looking for quite the game tomorrow for the Bombers.
Yeah. So that was apparently their first exposure to the Ig Nobel Prizes. I'm going to tell you about last year's winners, but before that, I'm going to look back even farther into the past and tell you about 2 other things that have won Ig Nobel Prizes. And just to give you a little bit of context, to win an Ig Nobel Prize, there's just one criterion. It's very different from any other prize that we're aware of. This is for things that make people laugh and then think. That's it, but it's got to do both of those things. It's got to be, at first glance, at first hearing, something that's just funny. and then something that also sticks in your head so that a week later, really all you want to do is find your best friends and tell them about it. That's the quality that we look for. We give 10 of these a year. This one won a prize way back in about 1994. This is a paper that was published in a medical journal. And as you can see, it's called Failure of Electric Shock Treatment for Rattlesnake Envenomation. The brief version of what this describes, it's a case that 2 doctors treated about somebody they identified only as patient X. Patient X, they explain, is a former Marine who had a pet rattlesnake. And he was very aware that rattlesnakes are dangerous and that if you are bitten by a rattlesnake, you'd better get medical treatment really fast or you could die. So he studied up and he went to what he regarded as the best source of medical information. This was some men's magazines he found. These men's magazines all gave him pretty much the same advice, and he took it to heart. And the advice was, if you see somebody who is bitten by a rattlesnake, you should immediately pass electric current through that person's body at the spot where the snake bit the person. That was the advice he had in mind. Now, it's not the advice you will get from any medical journal or any medical professional that we've ever run into, but that's the advice that he believed was quite real. He went out with a friend of his hiking one day. They were in Arizona. They went out in the Jeep with the pet rattlesnake, and they started walking, and the snake bit this man on his lip. He had already told his friend what to do should this happen, and so he insisted that the friend follow instructions. So at the insistence of patient X, the friend went and got their Jeep, brought the Jeep up, hooked up electrical wires from the Jeep's engine to the lip of patient X, and then revved up the Jeep to 3,000 RPM for 5 minutes. Right. That's what he looked like afterward. They managed to get in touch with a hospital. He was helicoptered to Tucson. 2 doctors saved his life. And then they teased out all this background information and thought that the world ought to know about this. And so they wrote this report. And again, we gave the Ig Nobel Prize to the 2 doctors and to patient X. I'll tell you a little bit of background on this. Every Ig Nobel Prize has many additional stories connected to it if you choose to follow the details. I'll tell you just a very few of them, otherwise we'd be here all night. This one, something that I learned just a couple of years ago. I had met one of the doctors way back when, but I met the second doctor just a couple of years ago when he came up to the Ig Nobel Prizes to the ceremony to take a bow. We invite past winners come back because the audience always loves to see past winners. And then he and I talked some, and he told me the story that was not in this, and in fact not many people know, that after they saved this guy's life, then this doctor went and sat and talked with him, got his history. One question was, have you ever been bitten by a snake before? And patient X said, yes, I was. Back when I was in the military in Okinawa, I was bitten by a snake, and a doctor saved my life. The doctor who was interviewing him said, in surprise, do you remember the name of the doctor who treated you? It was the same doctor. This doctor had saved this guy's life twice, both from snake bites. Okay. All right. When you read things in medical journals or in science journals, keep in mind that often there are extra parts of the story that are not included in what's published. So this is one thing from the past I wanted to show, just to give you a flavor of what the Ig Nobel Prize can be about. Each one is very different. Here's another one. This next one is a paper, a psychology paper that won the Ig Nobel Prize in the year 2000. This was written by 2 psychologists named Dunning and Kruger. Some of you may have heard the phrase the Dunning-Kruger effect. It comes from or because of this paper. They published this in 1999. We gave them the prize the next year. As you can see, the paper is called Unskilled and unaware of it. How difficulties in recognizing one's own incompetence lead to inflated self-assessments. Let me read that again. Unskilled and unaware of it. How difficulties in recognizing one's own incompetence lead to inflated self-assessments. I'll tell you a little bit more about the Ig Nobel Prizes in general. Again, this is the only criterion. It's for achievements of any kind that make people laugh, then think. Many of them do have to do with science and technology and medicine, but many have to do with other things. We often give out a peace prize. We have many times given out a literature prize. We've given out art prizes, all sorts of things. The peace prize one year went to the man who invented karaoke. There is a man who invented karaoke. He is Japanese, as you may have guessed. He came to the ceremony. It was his first visit to the United States. He was surprised to learn that karaoke had reached the United States. And we gave him the Peace Prize rather than some other category because, as the citation explained, by inventing karaoke, he invented an entirely new way for people to learn to tolerate each other. Whoa. Let me see if I can get this back. I pressed the wrong button. Patricia, do you know how I can recover this? I was talking about incompetence, right? Very much including my own. All right. If you win an Ig Nobel Prize, and I'll tell you in a minute about how that happens, but if you win an Ig Nobel Prize, you do win an actual prize. It's a different design every year. Every year it's handmade of extremely cheap materials. This is the prize from 2 years ago. We have a big ceremony and we have a theme for the ceremony, different theme every year. Theme does not necessarily connect with any particular prize, but with some of the other things that happen. The theme that year was time, so you can see how this prize fits in with that. There are a couple unusual things I'll point out about this. It's quite obviously a clock. If you look carefully at the number of minutes in this clock, it's 61 minutes. And you can see each of the hands is a sand clock. And you might want to think a little bit about the mechanics and the history of what's going on with these two kinds of clocks blended in one. You win, if you come to the ceremony, you win an actual prize, your team. Each team member also gets a piece of paper. It says they've won an Ig Nobel Prize. That piece of paper is signed by several people who have Nobel Prizes. So it's a nice piece of paper to have. And there's a tradition among many of the winners that they take that piece of paper home, frame it in a nice glass frame, and then hang it in the bathroom above the toilet. And we have no money, so we never were able to give a cash award, unlike other prizes. And in fact, if you win a prize and you want to come to the ceremony, you have to get yourself to the ceremony and back. And a lot of the winners come from other countries, but most of the winners do. But we figured out a way a few years ago to give cash to the winners, lots of cash. And so now each winner or winning team gets $10 trillion. They get a $10 trillion bill from Zimbabwe. The man who is responsible for creating those $10 trillion bills, and also the $100 trillion bills, and also the $1 bills that they print at the same time, which he explained is necessary because when you spend, this is his explanation, when you spend large amounts of money, you still have to make change. That government official also won an Ig Nobel Prize in mathematics for that. And just a little bit about the process. We get something like 9,000 or 10,000 new nominations every year for the prize. Pretty consistently between 10% and 20% of the nominations are people who nominate themselves. They almost never win. It does happen. One of them is in Atlanta. You may know him or know of him, Franz de Waal. who, I'll let you look it up on your own, what he won for. So he and one of his students. And in most cases, when we select somebody or select a team, we get in touch with them quietly. We offer them the prize quietly, give them the opportunity to decline this great honor if they wish to. And happily, most people who are offered a prize decide to accept. All right. The ceremony, the winners are kept secret until we announce them on stage. So they travel in secrecy. And then the heart of this ceremony up at Harvard, and it's webcast every year, has been since 1995, is the heart of it is when we introduce each new winner. And the winner steps out through a curtain, and there's a Nobel Prize winner waiting to shake their hand and give them their Ig Nobel Prize. And it's quite a lovely moment. It's as if the universe had two opposite ends, and they're getting to meet and look each other in the eye. And you can see neither one quite believes that it's happening. And then in between those 10 presentations of the new Ig Nobel Prizes, we do lots of other stuff. We jam in all kinds of things quickly, including even every year a new little opera about something in science, sung by opera singers, and the Nobel laureates have a walk-in or walk-on part at the end. This is a picture from the opera that year. It was about the leap second. And those are clocks, human clocks in back. And we made use of those human clocks elsewhere in the ceremony that I'll tell you about in a bit. We also, that year, one of the other things that we jammed into the ceremony was a quick little competition. It was a tic-tac-toe competition with very quick rules. And we had 4 teams competing against each other. One was a NASA scientist. That's the woman on the left. One was a brain surgeon. That's the man who is dressed as he normally is at work, like a brain surgeon. The third team was a team of Nobel Prize winners, and the fourth team was a team of roller derby skaters. And there, too, I'll give you the pleasure or displeasure of looking up who won. The video from this ceremony, most of the others, is on the web, on our website, so you can watch these things actually happening. And there's a tradition at the ceremony that started early on. I'm pretty sure it's the second year. A lot of people in the audience arrive carrying big heaps of paper, which they use to make paper airplanes. So it's a rather active airspace in the building. Here's a quick look at the winners of the prizes last year. The Ig Nobel Prize for Reproduction. That's the first time we ever gave a prize in that field, reproduction. Went to the late Dr. Ahmed Shafiq from Egypt for testing the effects of wearing polyester, cotton, or wool trousers on the sex life of rats, and for then conducting similar tests on the human male. This is one of the many papers that Dr. Shafiq published about that. You can get copies of these things quite likely from your library or over the net. And if you can't find them anywhere else, go to our website, and there are links to all these things. And the next image I'm going to show you is one of the illustrations that's part of this study. The Ig Nobel Prize for Economics was awarded to a team from New Zealand and the UK. They won for assessing the perceived personalities of rocks from a sales and marketing perspective. They published a paper describing their research. It's called The Brand Personality of Rocks, a critical evaluation of a brand personality scale. This is some detail. And perhaps you have your own evaluation of the personality of each of these rocks. And here are 2 of the 3 authors at the Ig Nobel ceremony giving their acceptance speech. Okay. And we have a mechanism in place. Often we use an 8-year-old girl. For this particular year we switched and we used those human clocks from the opera. That when the clocks felt that any of the speakers had talked long enough, which typically was after about 1 minute, the clocks would come over and begin making clock sounds. And that was quite effective in keeping the speeches brief. Here are some pictures that we ourselves put together of rocks that are famous for having distinct personalities. Looking around, I can see there are some people who aren't quite sure why this picture is here. If you are not quite sure why this picture is here, look around you. Find the youngest person near you and ask that person to explain to you why this picture is here. Again, looking around, I can see there are some other people who aren't quite sure why this picture is here. If you're not quite sure why this picture is here, look around you. Find the oldest person near you and ask them to explain why this picture is here. The Ig Nobel Physics Prize was awarded to a team based in Hungary, but the members are from several different countries, as you can see, Hungary, Spain, Sweden, and Switzerland. They were awarded the prize for discovering why white-haired horses are the most horsefly-proof horses. That's their phrase in their paper, horsefly-proof. And also for discovering why dragonflies are fatally attracted to black tombstones. They published a paper about each of these discoveries. This is the dragonfly paper. In both cases, it has to do with polarized light, what happens when light bounces off these surfaces, the horse coat or the black gravestone, and then what happens in the eyes of these insects. We're able to recognize certain polarizations of light. That's the physics behind this. This is some detail from the Dragonfly paper. And this is the horse paper. Okay, the most horsefly-proof horse has a depolarizing white coat. And here's some detail from that horse paper. And here's a horse. This is Susanne Åkesson from Sweden, one of the co-authors at the ceremony at the moment right after she was handed her Ig Nobel Prize. The Ig Nobel Prize for Chemistry was awarded to Volkswagen for solving the problem of excessive automobile pollution emissions by automatically, electromechanically producing fewer emissions whenever the cars are being tested. In the past year, I've done a lot of talks in many countries, and quite a few of them in Europe. And every country I was in, if I talk about this prize, before I mention anything other than the name Volkswagen, everybody in the place already knows what I'm talking about. and especially in the countries around Germany, people got extremely excited about this. This is part of the Environmental Protection Agency's report about this grand achievement. The Ig Nobel Medicine.
Did Volkswagen show up?
The question was, did Volkswagen show up? We tried. we tried. You know what it's like trying to get a bureaucracy to agree to something? So we were not able to ultimately to get anybody who was willing to publicly make a decision. So in that kind of case, we simply award it. If they're already so well known for this that this could not possibly really affect them. Now, the Ig Nobel Medicine Prize was awarded to a team from Germany. You can see it was a good year for Germany. They were honored for discovering that if you have an itch on the left side of your body, you can relieve that itch by looking into a mirror and scratching on the right side of your body, and vice versa. This is the paper in which they describe their research. It's called Itch Relief by Mirror Scratching, a psychophysical study. And this is one of the authors at the ceremony being urged to finish up his brief acceptance speech. You may have noticed that there's a silver man on the left there, and if you notice, perhaps you're wondering who that is and maybe even why he's there. He is named Jim Brett. Jim has a PhD from MIT. Sort of a mildly poetic phrase that. And he invents lots of stuff. And of the many inventions Jim has, there are two that people generally consider to be his greatest two inventions. One of them is inventing this idea of what he's doing now. He is a human spotlight. We always have two of them at the ceremony. They remove most of their clothing, paint themselves silver, and hold a flashlight up. They illuminate the proceedings. So Jim Brett invented this concept of the human spotlight. And he also, many years ago, was one of the people who invented something called 3D printing. Three-dimensional printing. Yeah, same guy. He's not the sole inventor, but there were just a handful of them who did. And after that, we had our own demonstration. Since we happened to have some Nobel laureates available on stage, we asked, and we had some mirrors, we staged a little demonstration of this tickling thing. Okay. You can try this yourself, of course. The Ig Nobel Prize for Psychology was awarded to a team from Belgium, the Netherlands, Germany, Canada, and the US for asking 1,000 liars how often they lie, and for deciding whether to believe those answers. They published this paper about it. The paper is called From Junior to Senior Pinocchio, a cross-sectional lifespan investigation of deception. This is a detail from the study. And you can see that the horizontal line tells how many lies people admitted to telling during the past 24 hours, from one lie on the left to more than 20 on the right. And the vertical scale here is what percentage of all people who answered this thing told that many lies during the past day and admits to it. And as you can see, pretty much everybody admits to lying a little bit. And I would be surprised if there's anybody here who doesn't lie a little bit. Typically something like, I really like your sweater. And quite a few people say they lie even 2 or 3 times a day, but it drops off after that pretty quickly and pretty methodically here. But then something strange happens if you look out, because there seems to be a group of people who behave in a very different way from almost everybody else. This group of people quite obviously admits that they lie 20 times or more a day. Very different from everybody else. And so that's one of the findings. You might ponder what this means and whether this applies to anything that you have encountered in your life, especially recently. And here's one of the authors accepting his Ig Nobel Prize. The Ig Nobel Peace Prize, which many consider the most prestigious of the Ig Nobel Prizes, was awarded to a team based in Canada for their study called On the Reception and Detection of Pseudo-Profound Bullshit. Here's a look at their paper, which, sure enough, is called On the Reception and Detection of Pseudo-Profound Bullshit. I'll remind you, you can get copies of these papers pretty easily. Okay? And if you go up to any good librarian and ask for it, usually they're pretty pleased that somebody's asking them for these things. So that's their paper. This is the team at the ceremony at the moment they were concluding their acceptance speech. The Ig Nobel Biology Prize was awarded jointly to 2 people. One of them is Charles Foster. Charles Foster got his share of the Ig Nobel Biology Prize for living in the wild as, at different times, a badger, an otter, a deer, a fox, and a bird. He shared the prize with another man. Both of them are British, by the way. The other man is named Thomas Thwaites, and you are now a little familiar with Thomas Thwaites. Thomas Thwaites got his prize for creating prosthetic extensions of his limbs that allowed him to move in the manner of and spend time roaming hills in the company of goats. Okay. Each of them has written a book. Okay. And I've read these books. They're quite worth reading, these books. Goat Man is the name of Thomas Thwaites' book. At a talk that we did together in London a few months ago, at Imperial College, London, somebody in the audience asked him, when you spent time, this was on a mountainside in Switzerland, he said, when you spent all this time with the goats, living with the goats, did you have any personal relationships? Did anything develop? And Thomas became a little bit shy for a moment. And then he said, well, probably nothing like you really want to hear. There was nothing sexual. He said, but there was one goat. He said, goat number 18. That's goat number 18 there. And should you ever meet Thomas, feel free to ask him about goat 18. He seems to have fond memories. This was the two of them. That's Charles Foster, who lived as all those different animals. And he really did. He lived out, in a hole in the woods for weeks at a time, eating the things that something that lived in a hole in the woods would eat, and communing with the other things there, or living underwater in a stream, with his head above the stream, and various other things. And here's Thomas Thwaites at the ceremony. We discovered that when somebody has been converted into a goat, it's a little difficult to hand them something and have them grasp it. And here are a few pictures from his time on the mountainside. I'm assuming you want to see a few more pictures of him. Yeah, you recognize both of these characters. The Ig Nobel Literature Prize was awarded to Frederick Sjöberg from Sweden for a 3-volume autobiographical work that he wrote, all about the pleasures of collecting flies that are dead and flies that are not yet dead. This is the first volume. It's been translated into English. Okay, it too is well worth a read. And here he is at the Ig Nobel ceremony delivering his acceptance speech. The Ig Nobel Perception Prize, first time we've given a prize in that field. The Perception Prize was awarded to 2 scientists from Japan for investigating whether things look different when you bend over and view them between your legs. They wrote this paper about it called Perceived Size and Perceived Distance of Targets Viewed from Between the Legs, Evidence for Proprioceptive Theory. Proprioceptive is a big word from psychology. Probably quite a number of people in this room use this word regularly, but it's pretty likely that there are lots of people in this room who have never seen this word before. And I wonder if, I'd like to ask a favor. If there's somebody in the room who is familiar with this word and wouldn't mind standing up and just explaining it in a sentence or two for everybody else. Is there anybody familiar with it? Yeah, would you mind?
Well, my understanding of it is that it's...
Here's a microphone here.
Oh, I'm sorry. My understanding My understanding of proprioception is that it's the awareness of your body in space, including the relative positions of your limbs and joints.
Yeah,
things like that.
Yeah,
It's sometimes called an additional sense.
Yes, that's what it is. And may I ask a further favor? Sure. Would you mind coming up here and... And hang on to the microphone. Okay. And would you mind? Yes, stand here. Would you mind bending over, looking through your legs, and Patricia, maybe you can help balance here.
Oh, do I need to hold them?
Yeah, well, yeah. If you could do that, and then when you're doing that, explain again. Oh. In case anyone had difficulty understanding the first time. Yes.
No, I can't.
Oh, sure you can. Okay. Patricia, could you help? Yeah, thank you.
Just explain again?
Please.
Now I have an entirely different take on things. Proprioception is the awareness of the relative positions of different parts of your body in space. It's sometimes referred to as a sixth sense. Is that good enough?
That's good enough.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Here is the lead author of that study, finishing up his acceptance speech. And then he felt that this is a difficult concept for people who've never encountered it. So he, too, decided to give a demonstration to the audience. And we were still worried that this was such a new thing to most people that we thought it wouldn't hurt to give another demonstration. And so we asked the 4 Nobel Prize winners on stage to help, which they very kindly did. During the past year, I have been told, and I have seen news reports that, and I've been told by many reporters from Japan, that this particular prize was especially popular in Japan. The Ig Nobels have been very popular in Japan, I've been told, for many, many years. But this prize and this professor apparently got even more than the usual amount of attention, and people described him to me as having become something of a hero to a lot of people, in the sense that people want a scientist to be something of a, intellectual hero for them. And that around Japan, many places that are places tourists go to look at beautiful scenery have started to take notice of this. And so there are things like this. And if anyone here is traveling to Japan in the next year or so and you run across this, I would be appreciative if you drop me a note and tell me if you tried this yourself and what you learned. At the end of each Ig Nobel ceremony, every year we ask all the winners and all the other people who are involved to gather at the center of the stage for a pointless photo opportunity. That's what you see here. So that was the end of the ceremony. And this year's ceremony happened just 3 weeks ago. You can look up the winners on our website. You can watch them. And we are now starting to gather all of the things we need to gather to prepare for next year's ceremony. And if you know of somebody who you think deserves an Ig Nobel Prize, could be yourself, could be your best friend, could be your colleague, could be your enemy, could be anybody. But if you ever run across somebody who you think deserves a prize, just drop us a note. That's how we've learned about the vast majority of people who have won Ig Nobel Prizes. One person somewhere happened to notice it and was kind enough to send in a nomination. So that would be really very nice of you to do that. This is our magazine. The Annals of Improbable Research comes out 6 times a year. And one issue, the issue at the end of the year, is always a special issue about the Ig Nobel winners from that year. And you can see Goat Man was the almost mandatory choice for the picture we would put on the cover. I hope you'll subscribe to the magazine. The magazine is mostly little quotations and citations from mostly science reports from around the world and some of them very old, some of them very new, about all kinds of things that have this quality of making people laugh and then think. So here especially, if you run across something, and a lot of people in this room are scientists or on the way to becoming scientists, you run across all sorts of stuff. If you run across something with this quality, please do what you usually do. Tell your 2 or 3 friends about that, and then drop us a note so that maybe we can tell the rest of the world. So that's pretty much what I've come to tell you. I'd be very happy to answer any questions if you have some, and thank you very much. Before we take questions, probably many of you know, but perhaps quite a few of you don't, that Patricia Yang is an Ig Nobel Prize winner. She and David Hu, her advisor. And Patricia, would you mind explaining in a couple of sentences what you did that won your prize?
No problem. I was winner of Physics Prize in 2015 on study how long it takes for animal to urinate. Figure out all animals pee at the same time, 21 seconds plus minus 13 seconds.
And this is almost any mammal.
All mammals.
From elephant to mouse.
Elephant to cats to tigers to human beings.
Okay. 21 seconds plus or minus 13 seconds.
Yes.
Okay. This too, you can do a little research on your own. If you have a question, raise your arm, and Patricia will bring you a microphone.
I'm just curious. I mean, I know at least one Ig Nobel went to get a Nobel. How many Ig Nobels have gotten Nobel Prizes by now?
How many Ig Nobel Prize winners have gotten Nobel Prize winners? One and sort of another one. The one is Andre Gaim, who won an Ig Nobel Prize in the year 2000. He and another physicist used magnets to levitate a frog. Okay. You may have seen the videos of this. You can find this on YouTube very easily. They did this because they rediscovered something about magnetism that most physicists were not aware of now or had forgotten, and almost nobody else would believe. And this was a pretty dramatic demonstration of it. And it's not just frogs, it's all sorts of stuff. 10 years later, Andre Gaim was awarded a Nobel Prize in physics for something else. But the way he found that something else sounds equally goofy, or maybe more so. Quite likely, when you were a kid, you played with a pencil and paper and Scotch tape. You scribble with a pencil on the paper, and you use some Scotch tape to pick up some of the gray stuff on there. And then maybe you flex it, and you watch the little gray flakes come off. There's a substance that called graphene, familiar to many of you, which is a form of carbon. It's the 2-dimensional form. So it's a sheet, 1 atom thick, so thinnest possible thing on Earth. And chemists had known for a long time that this thing exists, and they'd known where to find it. You can find it in any pencil. That graphite, that gray stuff, is millions of layers of these sheets stick together. But they stick together so tightly, nobody had ever managed to get them apart, which was extremely frustrating because there's all kinds of interesting stuff possibly going on there, but nobody could test it in any way. Until Andre Gaim and one of his students one night were playing with a pencil and Scotch tape and a piece of paper. And they collected some of the stuff that flaked off, and they put it under a microscope, and they discovered they had the first known big enough samples to examine and play with of graphene anywhere. And as a result of that, many of you know quite well, and probably some of you are working on, around the world there are entire new branches of science, there are entire new industries built up around the things they've discovered that this graphene can do. So you never know, when you're trying things out. The sort of part, there's another winner who won an Ig Nobel Prize and who already technically had a share of a Nobel Prize. The technically is because he had worked for one of the large international agencies that won a Nobel Peace Prize. So all of the hundreds of employees technically have a Nobel Prize, but that's different. He won his Ig Nobel Prize, he and a colleague. They're Dutch, they study insects, and in particular, they're trying to find ways to prevent malaria from being spread so much. So they discovered that malaria mosquitoes are very strongly attracted to two very specific odors. They're attracted to the odor of Limburger cheese and the odor of human feet. And they point out that there is something of a connection between those two things. Limburger cheese comes from Limburg. It's a region that straddles the border between Belgium and the Netherlands. And way back when, originally Limburger cheese was made by monks with bare feet stamping around in the milk. The bacteria that you can find in Limburger cheese and the bacteria that are on many human feet, these scientists say, is almost identical. Isn't that interesting? So, anybody else have a question?
Are you going to leave us to find out for ourselves what it was about this magnetism which we'd all forgotten?
Pardon?
You said that this guy with the floating frogs.
I'll give you the pleasure of looking that up.
Okay.
Both of them have written about it. Andre Gaim and Michael Berry is the other. And both of them have written about it quite a bit and are very happy to talk and write more about it. But it's more of a pleasure, I think, if you look it up yourself.
What's your favorite Ig Nobel Prize that you've given?
People ask me that all the time, and it's always a different one. But I have one that I usually mention it because it's always one of my favorites. It's the biology prize we gave out in the year 2003. It went to a scientist from the Netherlands who studies birds. He's an ornithologist. He's also one of the people who runs the Natural History Museum in the city of Rotterdam. His name is Kees Moeilijker. He noticed something really unusual one day. And he told his colleagues about it, and they all told him, you have to write this up and publish it in a scientific journal. And he resisted for 6 years, and finally he gave in to nagging. And he published it in a little biology journal in the Netherlands. Somebody who reads it sent us a copy. We gave it the prize. That report by Kees Moeilijker is the first scientific report of homosexual necrophilia in the mallard duck. Right. It's also one of the best written scientific reports you will ever read. Kees has done a TED Talk. A lot of Ig Nobel winners have done TED Talks about their thing. And Kees's is one of the most popular. Go, if you're curious, and just Google the 4 words, TED Talk Dead Duck. Okay. And every year on June 5th at the museum, Kees is now the director of the museum. But for many years now, every year on June 5th, they have a big celebration to commemorate the anniversary of the incident that Kees saw. And the public comes and they have scientists give talks, they reenact what happened. And then anybody who wants to walks a short distance into the middle of downtown Rotterdam, and they all enjoy together a lovely 6-course duck dinner. Okay, next question?
All of the examples, except one that you showed us, were published in peer-reviewed journals, right?
Yeah, but that's irrelevant.
But the chemistry one was based on a press release. How did that happen?
Because it's irrelevant to, many things really are irrelevant to us in choosing these prizes. First of all, it doesn't have to be about science. The only thing that matters is that it's something that has that quality. It makes people anywhere laugh and then think. It does not matter to us whether it's good or bad. And the notion of good and bad changes a lot. You look back over the history of science, almost everything that's considered good that's taught in every science class you've ever taken, if you go back and look at the earliest history, people made fun of it. So add some time to something, and what's good may later come to be seen as bad or vice versa, you don't know. Whether something is important or trivial also, that doesn't matter for this. So whether it was documented first in a press release, we check more than just the press release. But it doesn't matter whether they are a professional scientist or not. We've given a couple prizes to kids. Done thing. One of the prizes we gave 3 weeks ago was to somebody who did the work while he was a high school student. He's now a sophomore at University of Virginia. But he was a high school student in South Korea. I'll tell you what he did. He built on some research that won an Ig Nobel Prize years ago, done by 2 physicists in California who examine the physics of why it is when you hold a cup of coffee and walk, that it's almost impossible to do that without spilling. And it is. The physics of it make it nearly impossible. This high school kid in South Korea read this report, thought about it, and wondered, what happens if you hold a cup of coffee and walk backwards? And so that's what his report is about. And he discovered a couple things. I'll tell you just one. One of them is he discovered that it's far less likely to spill because of that. The reason is when you walk forward, as you probably have experienced too many times, everybody who walks at all comfortably gets into a rhythm. And so the harmonics mean you're sloshing this more and more and it's going to spill. That's why it spills. When you walk backwards, very few people are adept at walking backwards. And so you don't get into much of a rhythm. Unless you're a professional dancer, you may have training, so you do. But otherwise, almost nobody does. Of course, there are other problems if you walk backwards that might cause a spill. So maybe 1 or 2 more questions, yeah.
So, going back to your slides about the personality of rocks, I was wondering, what do you have against Dwayne Johnson?
There's so much to say about each of these prizes that the agonizing thing is paring down and only saying a little. So you're right, it's a terrible deficiency. And in future talks, I really should include him. Yeah, I apologize to anyone who's offended because Dwayne Johnson is not in that. Okay, and final question.
Is it quite easy to get Nobel Prize winners to agree to participate in this? I would think that some of them might be good sports, or otherwise, or do you get the same people coming back each year? Or do you use different folks?
There's some who come back most years, when they're not traveling, and then there are some who come once or twice or every few years. All we can do is ask them. That's our only power, is to invite people. And some people think it's a fun thing to do, and some people really think it's not what they do, and so they don't come. That's about it. But it's fun when they do. They get to be kind of off duty. When somebody gets prizes on that level, for the rest of their life, they're treated wonderfully. But sometimes it's nice to not be officially a god every single moment, to be able to be out in public and just have people appreciate you for being a person, who's another person in the room. So I think that may be a little part of it too. So anyway, thank you very much for coming tonight. Thank you to David, who especially for arranging this. Did you want to say something? Did you want to say anything? Oh, okay. All right. Okay, I've got a mic right here. And if you want more information on any of this stuff, just go to our website, improbable.com. So thank you.